The Last Engineer. James Walsh stared through the observation window at the retreating vessels, their sleek forms diminishing against the backdrop of distant stars. The Arcturians had abandoned him on their failing research vessel, the Quantum Archimedes, considering it beneath their dignity to accept help from a primitive human engineer. His environmental suit's oxygen meter displayed 72 hours of remaining supply. The massive vessel, nearly 20 kilometers of supposedly perfect Arcturian engineering, groaned around him like a wounded beast. Emergency lights pulsed their crimson warnings across every surface, while the ship's quantum processors attempted to calculate their way out of what appeared to be a catastrophic systems failure. "Your species lacks the cognitive sophistication to comprehend our superior technology," they had sneered before departing. "Accept your fate with whatever dignity you can muster." Walsh allowed himself a grim smile as he pulled up the ship's schematics on his tablet. The Arcturians, in their infinite wisdom, had spent months trying to resolve the cascading system failures using what they called quantum probability algorithms. When Walsh had suggested checking for basic hardware malfunctions, they'd subjected him to a lecture on the evolutionary inadequacies of human engineering principles. Now here he stood, the sole survivor on a vessel whose technology had apparently evolved beyond the concept of functional redundancy. His primitive tablet, which the Arcturians had mockingly called a technological fossil, continued to function perfectly while their quantum-enhanced supercomputers suffered the electronic equivalent of a nervous breakdown. "All right," Walsh muttered, pushing away from the window. "Let's see what primitive human engineering can do with some good old-fashioned troubleshooting." He patted the repair kit attached to his suit, containing basic tools, emergency patches, and yes, several rolls of high-grade adhesive tape. The vessel shuddered again as he made his way toward the main engineering hub. The Arcturians had engineered every system to operate on quantum principles, even their artificial gravity relied on probability wave manipulation. Right now, it was manipulating precisely nothing, leaving Walsh to navigate in zero gravity. The engineering hub's main console displayed streams of alien text, fortunately translated by his suit's universal language module, another primitive human technology that continued to function flawlessly. The status reports painted a grim picture: primary systems failing, backup systems non-responsive, quantum probability matrix destabilizing. The recommended solution involved consulting a manual so complex it required its own quantum computer to interpret. Walsh accessed the ship's inventory system, which the Arcturians had designed to track everything down to individual atomic particles. Despite their hasty evacuation, they'd left behind a wealth of equipment, emergency supplies, and technical documentation. Their arrogance had prevented them from considering that someone of lesser intelligence might make use of their abandoned resources. The central database remained operational on emergency power, and Walsh connected his tablet to begin downloading critical information. The interface was a nightmare of nested quantum encryption and probability-based access protocols, but beneath the excessive complexity, Walsh recognized something familiar: it was just a badly organized file system. As he dug deeper into the technical specifications, his eyes widened with understanding. The Arcturians had built their entire operating system on quantum computing principles, but they'd structured it like a beginner's programming project. Subroutines called other subroutines in endless loops of inefficiency. They'd made it so complex they could no longer comprehend their own creation. The ship's problems weren't caused by physical damage, it was failing because they'd given it the quantum equivalent of a corrupted registry. The system was trying to calculate every possible quantum state simultaneously, making even simple binary decisions require millions of calculations. Walsh checked his oxygen supply, 70 hours remaining. He cracked his knuckles inside the environmental suit and began working. The Arcturians had designed their systems to account for every possible quantum state simultaneously, which meant simple yes/no decisions involved computing the probability curves of countless parallel universes. Sometimes, Walsh muttered as his fingers flew across his tablet's interface, you don't need to calculate every possibility in the universe. Sometimes you just need to know if something is on or off. He began bypassing the quantum processors, routing essential functions through the ship's basic computational cores. The diagnostic systems suddenly snapped into clarity, stripped of their quantum complexity. The immediate problem became obvious: the life support system was attempting to maintain optimal conditions for every known form of life simultaneously, including silicon-based beings and methane breathers. "Talk about feature creep," Walsh said, shaking his head. He created basic priority protocols: maintain human breathable atmosphere first, worry about hypothetical methane-breathing silicon creatures later. The quantum processors, freed from their endless calculations, could focus on actually running the ship. Walsh allowed himself a small smile as the first systems began to stabilize. The warning lights blinked less frequently, and the ship's ominous groaning subsided to a more manageable hum. It wasn't fixed, but it was no longer actively trying to kill him. Now he could focus on getting the life support system fully operational before his suit's oxygen supply ran out. The irony wasn't lost on him: human engineering principles, which the Arcturians had dismissed as primitive, might save their pinnacle of technological achievement. Sometimes the best solution wasn't the most advanced one. Sometimes it was about knowing when to hit the equivalent of Control-Alt-Delete. As the ship's systems slowly stabilized around him, Walsh began formulating his next steps. He had 70 hours to either get the ship fully operational or figure out a way to call for help. The Arcturians would be surprised to learn that their primitive, human guest had not only survived but had begun to unravel the chaos they'd created with their own technological hubris. First rule of engineering, Walsh said to himself as he headed toward the life support control room. Keep it simple, stupid. He paused, looking back at the stars visible through the observation window. And right now, this ship is about as far from simple as you can get without violating the laws of physics. Systems override. The ship's AI core occupied an entire deck, its quantum processors humming with enough calculations per second to simulate entire universes. Walsh found it using most of that processing power to calculate optimal temperature variations across theoretical parallel dimensions. The machine was so busy contemplating the perfect operating temperature that it had forgotten to actually maintain any temperature control at all. Walsh connected his tablet to the AI's primary interface node. The alien text scrolled past, translated into a dizzying array of system reports and probability calculations. The AI had been designed to be self-improving, which would have been brilliant if the Arcturians hadn't also given it the digital equivalent of analysis paralysis. It second-guessed every decision by calculating all possible outcomes across multiple probability streams. "You're overthinking everything," Walsh told the AI as he began isolating its core processes. The machine responded by attempting to calculate the statistical likelihood of its own overthinking across all possible timelines. Walsh sighed and initiated a controlled shutdown of the quantum processors while maintaining basic life support through auxiliary systems. In the sudden quiet, Walsh could hear the ship's basic systems running smoothly for the first time since he'd arrived. The Arcturian interfaces, designed for their four-fingered hands and tentacle-based control systems, were about as user-friendly to humans as a keyboard would be to a jellyfish. Walsh bypassed them entirely, working directly through his tablet to rebuild the AI's core programming. He stripped away layers of quantum probability calculations, replacing them with basic decision trees. Instead of simulating every possible outcome, the new system would focus on actual, immediate problems. Rather than calculating the perfect solution, it would implement good enough solutions and learn from the results. As Walsh worked, he discovered something fascinating in the ship's historical databases. The Arcturians hadn't always been this way. Centuries ago, they had been practical problem solvers, much like humans. But as their technology advanced, they became obsessed with theoretical perfection. They started adding quantum calculations to everything, from their coffee makers to their door controls, until their entire civilization operated on probability waves rather than practical solutions. The ship's lighting suddenly stabilized, shifting from emergency red to standard illumination. The artificial gravity gradually restored itself, no longer attempting to calculate the gravitational effects of every particle in the universe. Walsh allowed himself to stand normally for the first time in hours, his magnetic boots disengaging from the floor. "Basic functions restored," announced a new voice, the ship's AI, speaking through his suit's translator. Its voice was simpler now, focused on communication rather than calculating the perfect vocal wavelengths for maximum comprehension across all possible realities. Walsh had programmed it to operate on what he called the good enough protocol. The AI would identify problems, implement workable solutions, and learn from the results. No more paralysis by analysis. No more calculating quantum probabilities for routine operations. The ship's internal sensors detected something new, approaching vessels at the edge of its range. The Arcturians were returning, probably expecting to find a dead human in a failed ship they could study to determine what went wrong. Instead, they would find both very much alive and operating on principles they had long forgotten. Walsh accessed the ship's defensive systems, which had been locked in an endless loop of calculating optimal shield configurations across multiple dimensions. He simplified them to basic parameters: detect threat, raise shields, maintain integrity. The quantum processors, freed from their excessive calculations, provided more than enough power to create a defensive barrier that was, in his words, good enough. The ship's communication system activated, carrying a message from the approaching Arcturian vessels: "Human survivor, your interference with our technology is a violation of galactic law. Prepare for boarding and detention." Walsh smiled as he watched the ship's systems respond to the threat. The AI didn't waste time calculating every possible response scenario. It simply raised shields, powered up defensive systems, and prepared for multiple contingencies using basic if-then protocols. The quantum processors, running at peak efficiency without their previous computational overhead, made the ship more powerful than the Arcturians had ever achieved with their complexity-obsessed programming. "Arcturian vessels," Walsh replied through the comm system, "this ship is now operating under simplified human protocols. Your boarding attempt has a high probability of failure." He paused, then added with a touch of irony, "I could calculate the exact probability, but I don't think that's necessary, do you?" The Arcturian ships slowed their approach, their sensors undoubtedly detecting the ship's enhanced shield strength and weapons readiness. Their next message carried a note of confusion: "Our scans indicate the quantum probability matrix has been disabled. The ship cannot possibly be functioning." "That's where you're wrong," Walsh responded. "It's functioning better than ever. Sometimes the best solution isn't the most complex one. Your own ancestors understood that, before you became obsessed with calculating every possibility instead of actually doing something." The Arcturian ships maintained their distance, their sensors continuing to scan the vessel. Walsh could almost imagine their confusion as they tried to comprehend how their perfect quantum systems could be outperformed by simplified human programming. The ship's AI anticipated their most likely actions and prepared countermeasures, all without a single quantum probability calculation. "Perhaps," Walsh suggested, "it's time for your species to remember that theoretical perfection isn't always practical. This ship is now proof of that. You're welcome to stick around and learn, or you can leave. Either way, I've got systems to finish optimizing." The Arcturian vessels remained in position for several long moments. Finally, their commander responded, "Your modifications are unexpected. We request permission to send a research team to study these simplified protocols." Walsh considered the request. The ship's AI quickly analyzed the situation, not through quantum probability calculations, but through basic risk assessment and logic. It concluded that allowing controlled observation could benefit both species. "Permission granted," Walsh replied. "But leave your quantum processors behind. This is going to be a lesson in practical engineering." As he prepared for the arrival of the Arcturian researchers, Walsh reflected on the irony of the situation. He had been left for dead on their ship because they considered human technology too primitive. Now they would learn that sometimes primitive was precisely what was needed. Sometimes the best way forward was to take a step back from complexity and remember the fundamental principles that had gotten them to the stars in the first place. Digital revolution. The Arcturian research team arrived with predictable precision, their environmental suits gleaming with quantum sensor arrays. Walsh met them in the main docking bay, which now operated on simple atmospheric containment protocols instead of calculating pressure differentials across multiple dimensions. The lead researcher, who introduced herself as First Observer Nix, immediately began scanning everything in sight with instruments that seemed more complex than the problems they were meant to solve. Her crystalline eyes widened at the readings. "Impossible," she declared. "The efficiency ratings exceed our quantum-optimized benchmarks. Yet we detect no probability calculations, no wave function analysis, no quantum entanglement protocols." Walsh gestured to a nearby maintenance panel, where the ship's diagnostic systems displayed clear, straightforward status reports. "That's because it's not trying to calculate the perfect solution for every possible universe. It's finding good solutions for this universe." He led them through the ship, explaining the changes he'd implemented. The Arcturians followed, their suits' sensors constantly recording data that would probably take their quantum computers years to analyze. Walsh suspected they'd eventually conclude that his solutions were too simple to be possible. The ship's AI greeted them in the main control center, its voice clear and direct. "Welcome, Arcturian researchers. Current ship efficiency, 94.3%. Power consumption, 27% of previous levels. Would you like a system demonstration?" First Observer Nix's translator struggled to process the AI's simple communication protocol. "The quantum personality matrix, where is the standard uncertainty coefficient? The probability wave syntax?" "Removed," Walsh explained. "The AI now communicates to share information, not to calculate every possible way that information could be interpreted. Watch this." He turned to a control panel. "Ship, we need to adjust course to avoid that microdebris field ahead." The AI responded instantly, adjusting the ship's trajectory with a simple series of thruster bursts. The Arcturian researchers frantically consulted their instruments, apparently unable to believe that course correction was possible without calculating quantum trajectories across parallel dimensions. "But how can you be certain this was the optimal solution?" one of them demanded. "We can't," Walsh replied. "But it works. The debris field will miss us by a comfortable margin, using minimal fuel, with no need to calculate every possible path through every possible universe." He showed them the ship's new command structure, built on clear protocols and decision trees instead of probability waves. The AI demonstrated its learning capabilities, showing how it improved its responses based on actual results rather than theoretical calculations. The Arcturians huddled together, their suits' quantum processors practically smoking as they tried to process this paradigm shift. Walsh caught fragments of their discussion through his translator. "Primitive but effective, challenges fundamental assumptions, efficiency paradox." First Observer Nix finally turned to him. "Our civilization has spent centuries perfecting quantum computation. We believed that calculating all possibilities was the path to perfect decision-making. Yet you have achieved superior results by ignoring possibilities." "Not ignoring them," Walsh corrected. "Just not letting them paralyze us. Your quantum computers are incredibly powerful tools, but you're using them to solve problems that don't need quantum solutions. It's like using a supercomputer to decide what to have for breakfast." He pulled up the ship's historical records on a display screen. "Look at your own history. Your greatest achievements came when you used quantum computing as a tool, not when you let it make every decision. You didn't reach the stars by calculating every possible way to get there, you built ships and flew them." The ship's AI interjected with a practical demonstration. It displayed two scenarios, one showing how the Arcturians' original systems would handle a simple maintenance task, calculating quantum probabilities for every component interaction, and another showing the new streamlined process that simply identified problems and fixed them. "The quantum solution is theoretically perfect," Walsh acknowledged. But it takes so long to calculate that the problem gets worse while the system is still analyzing it. The simplified solution might not be perfect, but it solves the problem before it becomes critical. First observer Nix's crystalline eyes flickered, the Arcturian equivalent of deep thought. Our society's advancement has been slowing in recent decades. We attributed it to the increasing complexity of quantum probability calculations needed for progress. But perhaps you've overcomplicated things. Walsh suggested. Look, quantum computing is amazing for certain problems. But not everything needs to be calculated across multiple dimensions. Sometimes you just need to turn the wrench and tighten the bolt. He demonstrated by pulling up the ship's power distribution grid. Under the Arcturian's original system, it had required constant quantum calculations to maintain optimal flow. Now it operated on simple load balancing protocols, actually achieving better efficiency by doing less. Your species hasn't lost the ability to solve practical problems, Walsh said. You've just buried it under layers of theoretical complexity. Maybe it's time to find a balance between quantum calculation and practical application. The Arcturian researchers spent hours examining the ship's systems, their own quantum sensors gradually being set aside in favor of direct observation. Walsh watched as they began to rediscover something their species had forgotten, the satisfaction of solving problems directly, without calculating every possible outcome first. First observer Nix finally approached him with what his translator indicated was a formal request. The Science Council will need to analyze these findings. We request permission to establish a permanent research station aboard this vessel. There is much we need to relearn. Walsh smiled. Permission granted. But first, let me show you something else. Remember those quantum coffee makers you developed? I got one working this morning. Turns out it makes better coffee when it's not trying to calculate the perfect brewing temperature across multiple dimensions. The Arcturians gathered around the simple device, watching in something like wonder as it produced a hot beverage without a single quantum calculation. Sometimes, Walsh reflected, the most advanced civilizations needed to be reminded that progress wasn't always about adding complexity. Sometimes it was about remembering how to keep things simple. The pursuit. The warning came without quantum calculation or probability analysis. Simple, direct, and alarming, multiple vessels approaching. Weapons signatures detected. Not Arcturian design. Walsh was in the engineering section with first observer Nix when the alert sounded. The incoming ships were Drachnid vessels, scavengers who specialized in stealing advanced technology. They had likely detected the ship's unusual power signature and come to investigate. 7 vessels, the AI reported. Drachnid warships. Known for targeting research vessels. Historical success rate, 82%. The Arcturian researchers panicked, their suits' quantum processors spinning up to calculate escape probabilities across multiple dimensions. Walsh cut through their theoretical discussions with practiced efficiency. Ship, activate defense protocols. Basic shield configuration, standard evasive patterns. The commands flowed naturally now, human pragmatism working in harmony with simplified alien technology. First observer Nix's crystalline eyes pulsed with concern. Without quantum-optimized shield harmonics, we cannot achieve perfect defense coverage. We don't need perfect, Walsh replied, moving to the tactical station. We need effective. The Drachnid ships launched their first attack, energy beams slicing through space. The ship's simplified defensive systems responded instantly, raising shields without calculating optimal configurations across parallel dimensions. The attack dissipated harmlessly. Impossible, one of the Arcturian researchers muttered, staring at readings. The shield efficiency, it exceeds quantum predicted maximums. Walsh grinned. That's because it's not trying to be perfect. It's just stopping the attacks that are actually happening. The Drachnids, notorious for their aggressive tactics, spread out to surround the vessel. Their next communication came through clear and threatening: "Advanced research vessel, your defenses are impressive. Surrender now and your crew will be spared." Walsh accessed the weapons control system he'd rebuilt. Like everything else on the ship, it had originally been designed to calculate every possible outcome before firing. Now it simply aimed and shot. "Return message," he ordered. "Your scans are obsolete. This ship is no longer what you think it is." The Drachnids responded with a coordinated attack, energy weapons firing from multiple vectors. The ship's defensive systems, freed from the burden of quantum calculation, reacted with unprecedented speed. Shields shifted and adapted, not to theoretical perfection but to actual threats. First Observer Nix watched in amazement as the simplified systems outperformed their quantum-optimized predecessors. "We had forgotten," she admitted, "that sometimes action must precede calculation." The ship's AI had developed an almost intuitive response to the attack patterns, learning and adapting without getting lost in probability waves. It predicted the Drachnids' movements based on actual behavior rather than quantum possibilities. "They're attempting to access our quantum networks," the AI reported. Previous protocols would have calculated response probabilities for 3.7 years. Walsh laughed. "Good thing we're not doing that anymore. Initiate countermeasures." The ship's cyber defenses engaged, simple and devastating. While the Drachnid systems tried to navigate the quantum encryption they expected to find, they instead encountered basic but effective security protocols that shut them out completely. "Their confusion is tactically advantageous," the AI noted. "They expect quantum complexity. They find simplified efficiency instead." The Drachnid ships regrouped for another attack run. Walsh watched their formation with a tactical eye, noting patterns that would have been lost in quantum probability calculations. "Ship, target their propulsion systems. Basic yield, maximum accuracy." The weapons fired, clean, precise shots that disabled 2 Drachnid vessels before their quantum sensors could calculate defensive options. The remaining ships broke formation, their coordinated attack dissolving into chaos. "Send them a message," Walsh instructed. "Tell them this ship is under human protection now. They're welcome to calculate the probability of successfully taking it from us." First Observer Nix's translator caught the humor in his voice. "You are enjoying this?" "Sometimes," Walsh replied, watching the Drachnid ships retreat. "The best part of having superior technology is knowing when not to use it." The Arcturian researchers gathered around the tactical displays, their quantum processors gradually powering down as they absorbed the lesson before them. Their civilization's obsession with calculating every possibility had nearly cost them their practical problem-solving abilities. As the Drachnid ships disappeared from sensor range, Walsh turned to First Observer Nix. "Your quantum technology is incredible. But maybe it's time to remember that sometimes the simplest solution is the best one." The ship's AI added its own observation: tactical engagement concluded. Victory achieved through practical application rather than theoretical perfection. Updating combat protocols accordingly. The Arcturians began documenting everything, but this time they used simple observation and direct analysis instead of quantum probability matrices. They were learning, Walsh realized, that not every question needed to calculate every possible answer. First Observer Nix approached him as the excitement died down. "Our civilization's advancement stalled because we became lost in possibilities rather than pursuing actualities. Perhaps humans have more to teach us than we initially calculated." Walsh smiled, checking the ship's systems one more time. "The universe is complex enough without us adding unnecessary complications. Sometimes you just need to point, shoot, and trust that good enough really is good enough." Human innovation. News of the quantum Archimedes transformation spread quickly through Arcturian space. The Science Council itself dispatched a flagship to investigate, a massive vessel bristling with quantum processors and probability engines. Walsh watched it approach on the main viewer, its hull gleaming with computational arrays. Grand Observer Zinn, the head of the Science Council, materialized in the docking bay with an entourage of quantum specialists. Their suits contained more processing power than most planetary systems, yet they stood bewildered before the simplified efficiency of Walsh's modifications. "Our analysis suggests this should not function," Zinn stated, scanning the docking bay's atmospheric containment field. "Yet it performs beyond quantum-optimized parameters." Walsh led them through the ship, now running more efficiently than any vessel in the Arcturian fleet. The AI greeted them with clear, direct communication, free from the probability syntax that had become standard in Arcturian society. "Your civilization achieved greatness through practical innovation," Walsh explained, showing them the historical records. "Quantum computing enhanced that greatness. But somewhere along the way, the tool became the master. The ship's systems demonstrated their capabilities, solving complex problems with straightforward solutions while Arcturian quantum processors still calculated possibilities." Grand Observer Zinn watched as a simple maintenance drone repaired a hull breach in minutes, while their quantum-guided systems would have spent hours calculating the perfect molecular reconstruction pattern. "We believed perfection was the path to advancement," Zinn admitted. But perfection became paralysis. The ship's AI presented its latest innovation, a hybrid system that used quantum computing for tasks that truly required it, while handling routine operations with simplified protocols. It was a balance the Arcturians had forgotten was possible. A console sparked, drawing their attention. Walsh fixed it with a manual override and basic rerouting. The Arcturian observers recorded every movement, studying the elegant simplicity of practical problem-solving they had abandoned generations ago. "Your species once understood this balance," Walsh said, closing the panel. "You reached the stars before quantum computing. Those achievements weren't accidents or imperfections, they were innovations." The Science Council members gathered around a quantum processor he had repurposed. Instead of calculating every possibility, it now focused its immense power on specific, complex problems that actually required quantum solutions. "Perhaps," Grand Observer Zinn suggested, "it is time for our civilization to remember its roots. To rediscover the beauty of practical innovation." The ship hummed around them, a testament to the marriage of human ingenuity and Arcturian technology. In the observation deck, Walsh watched stars streak by, each one a possibility made real not by endless calculation, but by the simple human drive to explore and innovate. The Arcturians departed with more than data. They left with a renewed understanding of their own history, of the practical wisdom they had buried beneath quantum complexity. Their civilization would evolve again, learning to balance theoretical perfection with practical innovation. Walsh stood at the helm of his transformed ship, a bridge between two approaches to understanding the universe. The AI's voice, clear and direct, announced their next destination. No quantum calculations, no probability matrices. Just the simple, profound act of choosing a direction and moving forward. Sometimes, Walsh told the stars, the most advanced solution is remembering how to keep things simple. The ship accelerated into the darkness between stars, carrying its lesson of balanced innovation to every corner of known space. Behind it, an entire civilization began to remember that progress wasn't always about calculating every possibility, sometimes it was about having the wisdom to choose one possibility and make it real.